Hey class, how you doing? I am Brett Pike, and today we are going to start a new course. And it's going to be on something that I'm very passionate about, that I went to college for, that according to authoritative sources, they would tell you I'm an expert because I went to college and I got a degree in history. But what I'm going to tell you is that none of us are truly experts in history. And the answer for that, the reason for that, can be seen right in the word. Look at it. Look closely to that word, history. What do you see? Is there anything that jumps out to you? I'll show you what I see. History is his story. His story. Well, who is he? Unfortunately, there are many powerful people who have influence over the way our history is written. There's another saying that history is written by the victors, right? If two countries get into a conflict and they have a war, who gets to write the history of that war? Is it the country and the people that lost that war? Or the country, the people, the influencers, the finances, the money behind the war on the side that won the war? Well, that's a question for you to answer. And people will tell you they know, but they don't. And the truth about history is we never truly know it because it's more of something that we have to investigate, something that we have to look into. So I'm going to tell you a story today. And I'm going to tell you many stories over the course of the next 2 to 3 months. And I can tell you this, that I will tell you those stories as I understand them to be true. But if you asked me and you said, hey, hey Brett, hey Mr. Pike, do you have the same view on history today as you did 5 years ago? And I'd say, I have a radically different understanding of what happened in the past. Now, what happened in the past, it didn't change. It's stagnant. It already happened. It's the same. But the information that I'm working with changed. And that's why when we study history, when we study his story, we must always question what we know to be true. We must always be willing to accept new information and readjust our worldview. Because when you look at the world like that, history is always fun because it's a story, it's an investigation, and you want to get to the bottom of it. But where people run into trouble is they decide they are knowers. And they attach their ego and their pride onto a story that they heard long ago. And if anyone questions, of course, I'll tell you a story. But as you start to get older and look more and more into history, you're going to have to read primary documents. You're going to have to read the original writings of historical figures. So this guy on my shirt, George Washington, he wrote words. He put words to paper. He wrote the rules for decency and civility. And that's something that you could sit down and you could read the writings of George Washington or any of the historical figures that you'll study and learn about over the course of your life. So if you take anything from this course, even more than what I tell you to be true, take the idea, accept in your mind that you should always question his story. But let's get into who I am. Many of you know me. You've probably taken my courses in propaganda or whatever other course I taught that you've watched. But for those of you that don't, I am a children's book author. And I'm the author of the Cubs to Bears children's book series, Operation Mockingbird and the Church Committee, The Bear from Jekyll Island, which is a book about the history of the banking system. Oh, that can't be exciting. Oh, believe me, it is a story that you will want to know because it is riveting. There is a conspiracy, there is secrecy and conspiring and people trying to get money and power. It's a big history to that. The Peanut Trap. You Are What You Eat, which is all about healthy living and eating healthy, and good bears always tell the truth, which telling the truth is a superpower, and you'll learn that as you get older, because what happens is people tell lies, and oh, what a tangled web they weave when at first they practice to deceive. But there are two more books that I wrote. Sorry about that. There are two more books that I wrote. Free Speech, Social Media Censorship, and the First Amendment. And The Right to Bear Arms. And these two books are very relevant to this course. Because in this course, we are going to discuss the Bill of Rights. In this course, we are going to discuss the Constitution of the United States of America. This is your textbook. This is one of the most singularly important documents in the history of humanity. And the reason for that is this document has been used as protection of our freedoms. Speaking of which, where do our freedoms come from? We're going to talk about that today. I want you to think about that. What is freedom? What does it mean to be free? Where do your freedoms come from? Do they come from this document, the Constitution of the United States of America, and within it, the Bill of Rights? Or do they come from somewhere else? Well, these are all things for you to decide. I'm just a guide with my own understanding of his story, but ultimately, in the end, you're going to have to make up your own mind. Now take a look at this map. What is this a map of? Right? You can see the continents: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, right? This is a map of the world. And if you look at the map, you can see the big red country to the left, right? The United States of America. Well, all the way across the ocean, there's a country so little. And sorry, I thought I'd be able to show you with my mouse, but apparently I can't. But there's a country that is tiny, so tiny that you could barely see it on that map, and that country is England. They couldn't be that powerful, right? Well, let me take you back about 200-300 years, right? I'll take you back to the 1700s or the 18th century, right? The 1700s. What year is it? 1722, or a very important year, 1776. And on this map, it shows you how much territory or how much land or how many countries were controlled by England, that little country. And as you can see, they had colonies and territory and land and control all over the world. These guys were powerful, right? They had control all over the world. They were a force to be reckoned with. And why were they a force to be reckoned with? Well, this is a big part of that reason. The Royal Navy of England. And they were powerful, and they sailed the ocean seas, and the last thing you wanted was to see that Royal Navy coming at you with a commander and a mean look on his face. What are you going to do? right? Back then, there weren't airplanes, right? There weren't, you didn't have air power and fighter jets and helicopters. So if you controlled the sea, you had a lot of military might, military power. And then when they got off of their naval vessels, off of their ships, and you had this bearing down at you, what are you going to do? What you going to do when they come for you, right? So, England was extremely, extremely powerful. And they had control over, it wasn't called the United States of America then. It was called, where we live now was actually considered the British or the English colonies, right? So America wasn't its own country. We belonged, or we were part of England or Britain. It's the same place, right? Part of England, right? And something happened. There was a history, his story, that we're going to learn more about over the next 2 months. But things had come to a boiling point. And the people in America, the colonists, as they were referred to, if you lived in America, you would have been a colonist, right? The colonists were very unhappy with their relationship with England. Their relationship with, they had a king, the King of England. And by the way, as you get older, we're going to have to learn their perspective too, because the King of England had his own perspective. But I'm coming at you from an American perspective, so understand that there's bias even within what I'm telling you. So, the relationship got rocky, and things would come to a boiling point. And especially in the state of Massachusetts, where the English government was so upset that they said the state of Massachusetts, right, they were in open rebellion. They declared them they were in rebellion against England and the English crown and the king. Rebellion. So, the English army marched toward Lexington and Concord because they had heard that the colonists in Massachusetts, the Americans, had weapons. And the English army thought, okay, well, if they're in rebellion, they're not allowed to have weapons. So, we're talking about guns. So they sent the English army to Lexington and Concord to go and get those guns. But there was a famous ride, right? Paul Revere, right? The famous ride of Paul Revere. He got on his horse and he began to ride, because he had to get to Lexington and Concord before the English army did. And luckily he was able to warn the colonists of what was happening, and they were able to prepare. And by the time the English got to Lexington and Concord, specifically Concord, the weapons had all been moved, so the English couldn't take them away. But now imagine, the English get there, right? They get there. And they have this giant force. And there you are, standing in front of them. And you know the English is coming to take away what you believe to be yours, your weapons. Well, the rest would be history. To this day, we still don't know who did it. But what would be known as the shot heard around the world. One of the colonists opened fire. He shot his gun at the English army. Both sides opened fire. There was a skirmish. The colonists retreated. But it's all right because the guns weren't there, right? The English couldn't get what they came to get anyway. And from there, the American Revolutionary War had kicked off. And the English themselves, after chasing the colonists, they would retreat because all of a sudden, all of these people started jumping into the fight. And before long, the English, which had the numerical advantage, there was more of them, they said, uh-oh, we better back up, run away, right? And as they were running away, they were, there's a lot going on there. Well, shortly after that, July 4th, 1776. Now, what day is July 4th? I'll give you a hint. Fireworks. July 4th, 1776. Congress declared the Declaration of Independence. And they claimed, they told the King of England, that the 13 American colonies, they were, you know how we have states in America? Well, the states back then were referred to as colonies because they weren't, it gets into terms. But the 13 American colonies, states, right? The 13 American colonies declared themselves 13 independent sovereign states. So they went from colony to state, which meant they were telling England, the King of England, the crown, that you no longer have jurisdiction over us. You no longer have the power and the control to tell us what to do. You no longer make laws that govern us. That's a big moment. That's why every July 4th you see people shooting off fireworks. That's a celebration of the American colonists coming together and saying that we will not be ruled by a foreign king. Well, battles would break out, and the American Revolutionary War would go on. And you might see this painting. I even have, I don't know if I could, let me see if you guys can see it. Right back there, you see it? There it is. That's a famous painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware River. And the colonists were getting beat back by the English army. And as the story goes, as his story goes, George Washington made a risky move. In the cold of the night, he took his army, the Continental Army. He was a general. He was a general, right? He was in charge of the army. And he said, we're going to cross the Delaware River at night. We're going to sneak up on the English army, and we're going to attack them. And he did this sneak attack, and it was a great victory in the state of New Jersey. Great victory that would help turn around the war. If not for any other reason, it really shifted the morale. It showed the colonists that we have a leader who will show us how to win. And eventually, there'd be the Battle of Yorktown. And in the Battle of Yorktown, George Washington and his armies would surround the British, and as his story goes, the American colonists received help from the country of France. And the British were supposed to have naval help. Their ships, their boats were supposed to come and help them, but they were intercepted, blocked by the French Navy. And because of that, because the English Navy was shut down and they were surrounded by George Washington and the Continental Army, they were forced to surrender. And that would forever change human history. Because at that moment, that Declaration of Independence had came into fruition. Because at that moment, the American colonies were now the 13 states of America. Because they had won the war. So, what were the circumstances like? Look at this guy. What were the circumstances like leading up to the revolution? I mean, just think about this. What would the circumstances had to have been like for you to face down these guys? Right? Imagine these guys standing right in front of you. Do you think the colonists were happy, or do you think they must have been pretty angry? This is a painting from something called the Boston Tea Party, in which a bunch of American colonists dressed up as Indians. Some people will call them Native Americans, some people will call them Indians. I'll say call them what you want, but I don't believe in political correctness. And as we study history, you'll see more and more why I don't believe in that, because they use the control of our language to control our thoughts, right? The words we say are very important. But if you want to call them Indians, you want to call them Native Americans, do so, but do so because you're choosing to, not because of social pressure. Because as soon as you give up words because someone's pressuring you to do so socially, you've given up your ability to speak freely. And isn't that the topic of this class? Aren't we talking about the Bill of Rights? Free speech. Remember, I wrote the book. Right? Free speech, social media censorship, and the First Amendment. If you want to understand the present day, you got to understand the past. And if you want to understand the importance of things done in the past, you have to understand the present day, and we're going to do that. We'll get back to that in a second. So, who was viewed as more powerful in 1775, before the Revolutionary War? The American colonies or England? Well, I mean, the colonies were subjects of the jurisdiction of England, right? They belonged to England. So, and we saw just how powerful England was. They had territory all over the world. And could England have conquered countries all over the world if they didn't have an elite military? Right? If they didn't have that big, strong navy and all of those soldiers, right? I mean, possibly, but it would have been a lot harder. Now, don't ever let anyone convince you that military conquest is the only way in which countries are conquered, because there are certainly other ways, and we are going to learn about that. In fact, that book I wrote about the banking system, that book has a lot to do with how countries are conquered. But it sure helps. And the English military was no joke. What does it mean to be free? And where does your freedom come from? After this class, I want you to sit down and I want you to write down your answers to those questions. What does it mean to be free, and where does your freedom come from? In the Constitution, and this is the focus of this class, there is something called the Bill of Rights. You know, the war ended in 1783, the Revolutionary War, and after the war, they had to structure a new government. I mean, they told England to get lost. Well, England was the government. So they came up with the Articles of Confederation, and they decided to throw those out. After a number of years, they decided it wasn't working out. Now, does that mean they were good or bad? Well, we're going to have to learn about the Articles of Confederation, but that's for another class. But they threw those out, and in 1788, they came up with this, which was the Constitution of the United States of America. And the Constitution outlines our government. Still, our government today. Now, things have been subverted and trickery has been used to erode or hurt the government that was originally designed in this book. But nonetheless, this was the structure of the American government, the new America, right? And this brought the 13 states together so that they didn't view themselves as 13 separate states. I mean, yes, they're still states, but they were one country, the United States of America. This is a very important document. But within that document, 3 years later, right, because when they originally made the document in 1788, people were still not happy. They were like, we just got rid of a king in England. We fought a whole war against the scary guys with the naval vessels and the redcoats, and we don't know if we have enough freedom, enough rights. There's a whole debate about that, and we'll learn more about that. So ultimately, they agreed in 1791 to add a Bill of Rights, or 10 amendments, 10 changes or additions to the Constitution. The First Amendment freedom of speech, religion, and the press. Now I'm going to read this to you and pay very close attention to the language, the way it's worded. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Notice, it doesn't say the people will have the right of free speech. It says Congress shall make no law. It says Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging freedom of speech or the press. So it's not saying, right, that it's giving you freedom of speech. It's restricting the government. It's saying the government can't make a law taking away your freedom of speech. And what does that imply? It implies that you already had freedom of speech. So where do our rights come from? Do they come from the government? Or do we already have them? Right? Some people will tell you our rights come from the government. But other people will tell you that we have natural rights. Other people will tell you we have inalienable rights. Other people will tell you we have God-given rights. People will tell you we have birth rights. But the commonality within those people is that we are born having freedom of speech. We are born with these rights. We don't get these rights from government. And government can only take those rights away. It's an important distinction. It's something we all have to consider, because if we're not born with rights and we get our rights from government, what will that mean for us in the future when new debates come up? That's something for you to decide. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Again, does it say we have the right to keep and bear arms refers to guns? Does it say we have a government-issued right to have those guns? Or does it say the government shall not infringe upon our right to have guns? It once again assumes, right? The document assumes that we are born with rights. Inalienable rights, God-given rights, natural rights. The Third Amendment, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. So one of the things that happened during the French and Indian War, a little bit before the Revolutionary War, is the English government told the colonists, hey, I know you have your house, but yeah, you have to let a soldier live in your house, one of our soldiers. And they said, what do you mean? I don't want to have someone living in my house. They said, you have to let them stay in your house. So they, the Constitution said, well, let's cut that out. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So it's saying you have a right to your personal privacy, your personal, right? Your personal effects, your personal property, right? No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise. This is the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment of indictment of a grand jury. So for the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Seventh Amendment, right? That gets into our rights to have a jury. So they said, wait a second, someone can't just accuse you of a crime and lock you away in a cell, right? You have to have a jury. So your neighbors have to sit down and, hear the accusations, and they could decide, did he actually do this crime, right? It's a jury, a trial by jury. These are important things, because otherwise, what if you're just accused of a crime and you don't have any recourse? They say, oh, you've been accused and now you go to jail. Does that sound fair? Now, is this a perfect system? I don't know. We'll see. But the Eighth Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishment, and we're going to have a fun class learning about that. So they're saying if someone commits a crime, you could put them in jail, and there's topics like the death penalty, which are controversial. But what you can't do is poke them in the belly with 1,000 needles, right? The Ninth Amendment, and this is an important one. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. I added the word rights there. But basically it's saying that if there's a right that's not outlined in the Bill of Rights, that doesn't mean people don't have that right. And right, keep in mind, the idea behind that is we're born with certain rights, right? That's why when they wrote this document, they didn't say the government's giving you these rights. They said the government cannot infringe upon, cannot take away these rights that you already have. So what the Ninth Amendment is saying is that just because we didn't put any additional limitations on the government here doesn't mean your rights stop at this document. You have more rights than are outlined in this document. And the 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States of America, I added of America, by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So it's saying that any powers that this document doesn't give to the big federal government, the president, right? The big federal government, and we'll get into the structure of government, then by the nature of them not being included, it's the individual states that decide. So if you live in New York, New York should decide. If you live in Wyoming, Wyoming should decide. If you live in Ohio, Ohio should decide. This is the Bill of Rights. This is what our course will be on. And over the next 2 to 3 months, we are going to learn a lot about it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next